The sun was setting over the big white mansion, its golden light spilling through the tall glass windows. The house looked peaceful from the outside. But inside, there was a strange feeling in the air. The millionaire, Mr. Anderson, stood in the grand living room, his hands folded behind his back. He was a tall man with silver hair and sharp eyes, dressed in a dark blue suit. Everything about him showed power and wealth. But tonight, there was something softer in his face. Something. Almost nervous, his daughter Emily walked in. She was 17, wearing a simple white dress, and her long brown hair was tied loosely. She had grown up in this mansion, surrounded by expensive things, but she had never cared much for them. Emily was smart and curious, but she still missed her mother every day. It had been 3 years since her mother passed away, and although her father never said it out loud, she could see he was lonely. "Emily, sit down," her father said gently. His voice didn't have the usual strict tone it carried when he was discussing business. Instead, it sounded careful. Almost unsure, Emily sat on the soft cream sofa, crossing her legs and looking at him. He cleared his throat before speaking. "I've been thinking about the future," he began. His eyes met hers for a moment before drifting to the floor. "I believe it's time I consider getting married again." Emily blinked, not sure if she heard him right. Married again? The thought felt strange. She had gotten used to seeing her father alone, busy with his work and keeping his feelings locked away. Now, the idea of someone else stepping into their lives made her uneasy. Before she could ask anything, her father continued, "I want you to have a say in this, Emily. I've decided that you will choose who my new wife will be." She stared at him, completely shocked. "Me?" she asked. "You want me to choose?" "Yes," he said firmly. "I've invited 5 women here. They are all suitable. They come from respected families, they understand our world, and they could make good companions for me." He hesitated before adding, "and good mothers." "For you," Emily's stomach tightened. The way he said suitable made it sound like he was picking a business partner, not someone to share his life with. She thought about her mother's warm smile, the way she used to laugh when they cooked together. None of this felt like that. She wanted to ask why he couldn't just choose for himself, but she could see he was trying to make her feel included. Maybe he thought this would help her accept the change. Maybe he thought it would make her happy. Just then, the sound of heels clicking echoed in the hallway. A maid entered, carrying a silver tray with 2 glasses of fresh juice. She placed it on the glass table and left quietly. Emily noticed how her father barely looked at the maid. It wasn't rudeness, it was just how things were in this house. Staff were invisible unless they made a mistake. Her father walked toward the large window, pulling back the curtains so the last rays of sunlight lit up the room. "They will be arriving tomorrow," he said. "I expect you to spend some time with each of them, get to know them, and then make your choice. This is important, Emily. Our family name means everything, and I want to make sure the person who joins it is worthy." The words family name and worthy rang in her ears. Emily nodded slowly, but inside she felt a heavy weight. This wasn't just about choosing someone for her father. This was about choosing the person who would live in her home, eat at her table, and maybe even try to act like her mother when her father left the room to take a call. Emily stayed seated, staring at the untouched glass of juice. The ticking of the big golden clock on the wall filled the silence. She thought about what tomorrow would bring. 5 women, all dressed in the finest clothes. Each one probably smiling politely, while secretly hoping to marry into wealth. She didn't know any of them, but she already felt like they wouldn't understand her. How could they? They didn't know what it was like to lose a mother, to feel like something was missing no matter how many expensive things surrounded you. From the corner of her eye, she saw Grace, the black maid who had worked in their home for as long as Emily could remember. She was carrying a basket of fresh laundry. Moving quietly through the hallway, Grace had been there when Emily's mother was alive and after she passed. Grace was the one who always made sure Emily ate when her father was too busy. She never tried to replace her mother, but she was always there. Emily watched her disappear into another room. And for a brief moment, she felt comfort. Grace was real. She didn't pretend to be something she wasn't. She didn't speak in fancy words or wear shiny jewelry. And she certainly wasn't here for money. She already worked in the house. But Emily shook her head. That wasn't the point. Tomorrow would be about the 5 women her father had chosen, not the people who already worked for them. Still, as the sun fully set and the room grew dim, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that this decision her father had given her was bigger than she realized. And for the first time, she wondered, was she ready to make a choice that could change both their lives forever? The next morning came faster than Emily wanted. The soft light of dawn spilled into her room, but she didn't feel ready to face the day. She stayed in bed for a while, listening to the quiet hum of the mansion, the distant clink of dishes in the kitchen, and the sound of the gardeners trimming the hedges outside. Today was the day she would meet the 5 women her father had chosen. The thought made her stomach twist. After breakfast, she went to the main hall where her father was already waiting. He looked calm, almost too calm, as if this was just another business meeting for him. A row of luxury cars began arriving outside, each one sleek, polished, and shining under the sun. The drivers opened the doors, and one by one, the women stepped out. The first woman was tall and elegant, wearing a long red dress that hugged her figure. She had perfectly styled blonde hair and carried a designer handbag that probably cost more than a year's worth of a normal person's salary. She smiled at Emily. But it was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. The second woman wore a sharp white suit with diamond earrings that sparkled in the sunlight. She walked with confidence, her heels clicking loudly on the marble floor as if each step announced her importance. She shook Emily's hand gently, but quickly, then turned her attention to her father as if Emily wasn't really the one she came to impress. The third woman was younger than the others, maybe in her late 20s, with silky black hair and deep red lipstick. She kept glancing at her reflection in the golden-framed mirror near the entrance, adjusting her hair and smiling at herself more than at anyone else. The fourth woman had a cold, strict look, dressed in all black with heavy perfume that filled the air. She barely spoke a word as she greeted them, only offering a short nod. The last woman was different, shorter, with soft curls and a voice so sweet it almost seemed fake. She complimented Emily's dress right away, but then began talking about how she had been to Paris 5 times and stayed in only the finest hotels. Emily followed her father into the sitting room where tea and small cakes had been prepared. The women sat around like they were in some kind of competition, each trying to be noticed more than the others. Emily felt like she was in the middle of a strange contest, one where she was the prize. Her father encouraged her to talk to each woman, so she spent the next few hours with them one by one. The first woman took her to the garden and told her about her huge family estate. She spoke about how she would bring class to Emily's life and how she could teach her to behave like a real lady. Emily forced a polite smile, but inside she felt like she was being judged. The second woman invited her for a drive in her expensive car. During the ride, she talked about her investments and her connections in high society. She mentioned how marrying her father would open doors for business deals. It was clear to Emily that love wasn't part of her plan, only power. The third woman suggested they shop together. She took Emily to a boutique in the city and picked out dresses for her to try. The prices were shocking, and every time Emily said she didn't like something, the woman brushed it off, saying, "You just don't understand fashion yet." By the end of the trip, Emily felt tired and unseen. The fourth woman didn't bother with small talk. She sat Emily down and asked blunt questions about her grades, her friends, and what she wanted to study in the future. There was no warmth in her, to only a cold, distant interest. Emily felt like she was being interviewed, not cared for. The last woman tried to be the most friendly, but her words felt rehearsed. She talked about how she had always wanted a daughter, but then mentioned she would hire a personal stylist for Emily immediately, as if her appearance needed fixing. By the time the day was over, Emily was exhausted. She had been smiling and nodding for hours. Pretending to be interested while inside, she felt more and more certain that none of these women truly wanted to be her mother. They wanted the life her father's money could give them. They wanted the status of being married to a millionaire. When she returned home that evening, she found Grace in the kitchen folding fresh laundry. Grace looked up and smiled warmly. "You look tired, sweetheart," she said. Without asking where she had been or who she had met, she poured Emily a cup of warm tea and slid a plate of freshly baked bread across the table. Emily sat down, her shoulders finally relaxing for the first time all day. Grace didn't try to impress her, didn't boast about anything. She just listened when Emily spoke, nodding now and then, offering a small laugh at the right moments. It was strange. Emily had spent an entire day with women dressed in the finest clothes, riding in luxury cars, eating in expensive restaurants. Yet none of it made her feel as comfortable as sitting here in the quiet kitchen with Grace. But she didn't say any of that to her father. She knew he was expecting her to give her full attention to the women he had chosen, and tomorrow she would have to spend even more time with them before making her decision. Still, as she went to bed that night, Emily couldn't help but think of Grace's smile. The warmth in her voice and the way she didn't make Emily feel like a task or a project. For the first time, Emily wondered if the best choice wasn't in the group her father had picked at all, but right here, already in their home. 2 days later, the mansion was filled with the sound of laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the faint music playing from the corner speakers. Mr. Anderson had arranged a formal dinner so Emily could spend time with all 5 women together. The long dining table was set with shining silver cutlery, crystal glasses, and tall candles. The air smelled of roasted meat, fresh bread, and expensive perfume. Emily walked in wearing a soft blue dress. She felt like everyone's eyes turned to her at once. The 5 women were already seated, each dressed in something elegant and expensive. Her father stood at the head of the table, smiling proudly. "Tonight is special," he said. "I want us to enjoy good food and good company." The first part of the dinner went smoothly. The women made polite conversation, asking Emily about her hobbies, her school, and her favorite places to travel. But she could feel the competition in the air every time one woman told a story. Another would interrupt with something bigger or more impressive. It was less like a family dinner and more like a contest of who could shine the most. Then it happened. The waiter accidentally spilled a small amount of soup while serving one of the women in the red dress. It barely touched her expensive gown, but she gasped loudly as if it were a disaster. "Are you blind?" She snapped at the waiter. "Do you even know how much this dress costs?" Her voice was sharp, echoing in the big dining room. The waiter stammered an apology. Bowing his head, Emily's eyes went straight to her father, waiting for him to say something. But he only gave a polite smile and told the woman, "I'll have the staff handle it," as if nothing serious had happened. Emily felt her chest tighten. She didn't like the way the woman looked at the waiter. As though he were less than human, she glanced toward Grace, who was standing quietly by the side of the room with the other staff. Grace's face didn't change, but Emily could see a flicker of sadness in her eyes. As the night went on, the women's conversations turned sharper. They started making little comments about one another's dresses, hair, and even accents. Emily kept her smile. But inside, she was growing tired. This wasn't kindness. This wasn't warmth. This was a game. And she didn't want to be part of it. After dessert, Emily excused herself to walk in the garden for some fresh air. The night was cool. The soft glow of the garden lights made the flowers look like they were glowing. She followed the stone path and soon heard voices coming from behind the tall rose bushes. She stopped, hidden by the leaves, and listened. Two of the women were talking in low voices, but their tone was filled with amusement. "She's so quiet. It will be easy to control her once I'm married," one said, laughing softly. "Of course, and her father is desperate. He'll agree to anything if it means having a beautiful wife on his arm," the other replied. Emily's stomach turned. They weren't talking about love or family. They were talking about power. About her father as if he were a prize. She stepped back silently. Not wanting them to know she had heard, the night air felt colder now, and she hugged herself as she walked back toward the mansion. Inside, the dinner was winding down. Her father was thanking the guests. Shaking their hands warmly, Emily took her seat again. But her thoughts were far away. She could see the faces of the 5 women, smiling, laughing, pretending, and she knew now that not one of them cared about her father for the right reasons. Later, when the guests had gone, Emily found herself in the kitchen again. Grace was washing a few dishes, her sleeves rolled up. She looked up and smiled. "You didn't eat much tonight," she said. Emily sat down at the small wooden table in the corner. "I wasn't very hungry," she replied quietly. Grace didn't press for details. Instead, she poured her a cup of warm milk and slid it across the table. The warm steam rose, carrying a sweet scent. They sat there in silence for a while, Emily watching the way Grace's hands moved, steady and calm. Grace didn't try to fill the quiet with empty words. She simply stayed there, letting Emily breathe. That night, lying in her bed, Emily thought about what she had overheard in the garden. She thought about the way the women had treated the waiter, about the fake compliments and the sharp looks they gave each other. Her father had told her to choose carefully, to pick someone worthy of their family name. But she couldn't stop asking herself, what if being worthy had nothing to do with money or social status? And as she drifted off to sleep, she realized something important for the first time. She wasn't just doubting the women her father had chosen. She was starting to imagine the possibility of choosing someone completely unexpected. Someone who might truly care, not for the mansion, not for the money, but for them as people. The next afternoon, Emily felt restless. She didn't want to see any of the women again. But her father had told her they would be visiting over the next few days to spend more time with her. He wanted her to build connections, as he put it. She decided to avoid the grand rooms where they usually gathered and took a walk through the garden instead. The spring air was warm, and the soft smell of roses floated through the breeze. She wandered down the stone path until she reached the small side garden near the staff quarters. It was quieter here. The sound of the fountain mixed with a gentle rustling of leaves. That's when she saw Grace. She was kneeling in the soil, planting small flowers in a wooden box. Her hands were covered in dirt, and her hair was tied back in a simple scarf. She didn't notice Emily at first. Emily stood there for a moment, just watching. Grace worked slowly but with care, pressing the soil gently around the roots of each plant. When she finally looked up and saw Emily, she smiled warmly. "Afternoon, Miss Emily," she said. "You're far from the fancy part of the garden." Emily walked closer. "I needed some air," she replied, "and some quiet." Grace chuckled softly. "Quiet is rare in this house lately," she said, dusting her hands on her apron. "All those important ladies in their important dresses. They keep the air heavy." Emily laughed lightly. Feeling her shoulders relax, she sat on the low stone wall beside the flower bed. "They don't feel real," she admitted. "It's like they're all wearing masks. I don't know who they are." "Really are." Grace looked at her with kind eyes. "Sometimes people think they need to show their best face to be loved," she said. "But the truth is, if you can't be yourself, then the love isn't real." Emily thought about that for a moment. It was simple, but it made sense. She remembered the cold smiles, the way the women had tried to impress her with money, trips, and fancy promises, none of it had felt like the warmth she used to know. "When her mother was alive, you knew my mother," Emily said quietly. "Did she ever pretend with people?" Grace's hand slowed in the dirt. "Your mother was honest," she replied. "She didn't care about titles or bank accounts. She cared about how people treated others. Whether they were kind when no one was watching." Grace smiled faintly. "That's why she and I became friends, even though I was just the maid." Emily felt a lump in her throat. She missed her mother's gentle voice, the way she would hold her hand and listen without rushing. Grace's words made her realize how much she longed for that kind of honesty in the house again. They sat there for a while, talking about the flowers Grace was planting. Grace told her how certain blooms needed more shade. While others drank sunlight greedily, Emily listened closely, even helping her press a few seeds into the soil. She didn't mind getting dirt on her hands. It felt grounding, real, as they worked. Emily realized she was smiling more than she had in days. Grace wasn't trying to win her over or prove anything. She was simply there, giving her time and attention without expecting anything in return. Eventually, Grace stood and stretched, brushing the dirt from her knees. "You'd better head inside before your father sends someone looking," she said with a playful smirk. Emily nodded, but didn't want to leave. The quiet safety she felt in this small garden was something she wished she could carry with her. Everywhere, when Emily finally returned to the mansion, she found two of the women sitting in the lounge. They were sipping tea and gossiping about someone from a wealthy family they both knew. Their voices were sharp, their words laced with judgment. Emily sat for a few minutes, trying to join the conversation. But it felt like stepping into cold water. She quickly excused herself. Back in her room, she lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling. The contrast between the garden with Grace and the lounge with the women was too strong to ignore. In the garden, she had felt seen and heard. In the lounge, she had felt invisible. Later that evening, during dinner with her father, he asked her which of the women she liked the most so far. Emily hesitated. "I'm still thinking," she said. I'm not sure if any of them are the right choice." Her father frowned slightly. "Emily, you have to choose soon," he reminded her. "They are all fine women with strong connections. This is about what's best for our future," she wanted to tell him that best didn't always mean richest or most connected. But she stayed silent. He wouldn't understand, at least not yet. That night, Emily sat by her window, looking at the stars. She thought about her mother, about the warmth their home used to have, and about Grace's words. A quiet thought began to take root in her mind, one she hadn't dared to fully imagine before. What if she didn't choose any of the 5 women? What if her choice shocked everyone? What if the person truly worthy of becoming part of their family was someone her father had never even considered? It was a dangerous thought, one that might make her father angry. But as the stars shone quietly in the night sky, Emily felt her heart settle on the idea. She didn't know how or when she would tell him, but she knew this: she couldn't choose someone for the sake of money or power. She had to choose someone who would bring real love back into the house. And the more she thought about it, the more one name kept coming to mind: Grace. The day of the decision came faster than Emily expected. The whole mansion seemed busier than usual. Staff were running around, polishing silver, arranging fresh flowers, and setting the dining table with the best china. It felt like the house was preparing for some big celebration, but for Emily, it felt more like a storm she couldn't avoid. Her father had planned everything. He wanted the 5 women to arrive in the afternoon, spend some time with Emily, and then be present when she made her choice. He believed this would be a proud, memorable day for Emily. It was a day filled with pressure. She stood in front of her mirror that morning, brushing her hair slowly. Her blue dress was already laid out on the bed. It was elegant but simple. She had chosen it because it reminded her of her mother. The soft fabric, the way it flowed, made her feel a little braver. Downstairs, she could hear the sound of cars arriving one after another. The 5 women stepped into the mansion like they were walking into a royal palace. Each one dressed in a gown that sparkled under the chandelier. Their perfume filled the air, and their voices were loud, confident, and polished. Emily greeted them politely, but her heart wasn't in it. They smiled at her, each one certain they had done enough to be chosen. One handed her a small box containing a diamond bracelet. Another gave her an envelope with tickets to a luxury trip. A third woman offered her an antique book collection. Saying it would make her smarter, Emily thanked them all. But inside, the gifts felt heavy, like chains meant to pull her in. Her father walked in, looking proud and satisfied. "Emily, my dear," he said warmly, "today you will make a choice that will shape our family's future." He spoke loud enough for the women to hear, and they all straightened in their seats, ready for their moment. The afternoon passed slowly. Emily sat with each woman for a short time, but her mind kept drifting elsewhere. Whenever she looked at them, she saw polite smiles, but no real warmth. They asked questions, but most of the time, they spoke about themselves, about their travels, their jewelry, their connections. It was as if they were reading from a script. After hours of this, the staff brought in trays of tea and pastries. The room filled with the sound of teacups clinking and polite laughter, but Emily barely touched her cup. Her eyes wandered toward the doorway where Grace stood quietly with the other staff. Her apron was freshly pressed, her hair tied neatly. She wasn't trying to be noticed, but Emily noticed her anyway. She thought about all the small things Grace had done over the years, the way she always remembered her favorite tea, the way she tucked an extra blanket at the foot of her bed during cold nights, the way she never made her feel judged or uncomfortable. Her father clapped his hands lightly to get everyone's attention. "It is time," he announced with a proud smile. "Emily, my dear, tell us, who have you chosen?" The room went quiet. All eyes turned to her. The 5 women sat upright, their hands resting neatly on their laps, each waiting for the moment they could claim victory. Emily's heart pounded. She stood slowly, her palms slightly damp. She looked at her father, then at the women, and finally at Grace, who stood in the corner with her hands folded. "I've thought about this carefully," she began, her voice steady. "I've spent time with each of you, and I've listened to your stories. But this decision is not about who has the most money or the most connections. It's about who will care for this family, who will love us for who we are, not for what we can give." A ripple of confusion moved across the women's faces. Emily took a breath, and so, "I choose Grace." Gasps filled the room. One woman's eyes went wide in disbelief. Another's lips tightened in anger. A few exchanged shocked glances, as if they couldn't believe what they had just heard. Her father froze, his smile fading. "Grace," he repeated, almost as if the name didn't make sense. Emily nodded. "Yes, Grace. She's been here for years. She's kind, she's honest. She's always been there for us. She doesn't see this family as a prize. She sees it as people worth caring for." Grace's eyes widened, her hands trembling slightly. "Miss Emily," she started softly, "I can't." You're not just anything," Emily said firmly. "You're the one person who makes this house feel like a home." The silence in the room was heavy. The women shifted uncomfortably, some clearly insulted, others just stunned. Her father's expression was unreadable, part confusion, part disbelief. Finally, he said, "Emily, this is unexpected." His tone was careful. "We will discuss this privately." But Emily didn't lower her head. She met his eyes with quiet strength. "There's nothing to discuss. You told me to choose, and I've chosen." Grace stood frozen in the corner, unsure what to do. She had never imagined being in the middle of something like this. Her cheeks warmed, and her eyes glistened not with ambition, but with something deeper. The women realized the decision was final, one by one. They stood, offering polite but cold goodbyes before leaving the mansion. Their heels clicked sharply on the marble floor, the scent of their perfumes fading with them when the door finally closed. The house felt different, quieter, lighter. Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her father looked at her for a long moment, as if trying to understand what had just happened. He didn't argue, not yet. But Emily could tell this choice would stay in his mind. Grace still stood there, speechless. Emily walked over and took her hand. "You're family to me," she said softly, "and I want you to be family to him too." Grace's lips parted, but no words came out. Only a small, emotional smile appeared. And in that moment, Emily knew she had done the right thing, even if the rest of the world couldn't understand it. The hours after Emily's announcement felt strange. The house was quiet now that the 5 women had left, but the air was still heavy. Her father didn't say much. He went to his study and closed the door, leaving Emily in the living room with her thoughts. She sat on the couch, staring at the flickering light of the fireplace, wondering if she had made things harder for herself. She knew her choice had shocked everyone, especially her father. But she also knew it was the truth. She had seen enough fake smiles and empty words to last a lifetime. She wanted someone real, and Grace was the only person who had ever given her that. Grace kept herself busy in the kitchen. She moved quietly, but Emily could tell she was uneasy. When Emily walked in, Grace was washing dishes, her hands moving in slow circles under the warm water. "Grace," Emily said softly, standing by the doorway. Grace turned, her eyes unsure. "I didn't mean to embarrass you," Emily continued, "but I meant what I said. I chose you because you've always been here for me. You're kind, and you care without asking for anything back." Grace put down the dish and dried her hands with a towel. "Emily, you don't understand," she said gently. "Your father. He lives in a world where people care about names and titles. Me? I'm just the maid. I don't belong in that world." Emily stepped closer. "You belong in our family," she said firmly, "and I don't care what anyone else thinks." Grace gave a small smile, but didn't answer right away. She picked up the towel again and started folding it neatly, as if keeping her hands busy would help her keep her emotions in check. That night, Emily went to bed early, but she couldn't sleep. She kept hearing the quiet sound of Grace's voice and the doubt in her words. She knew this wasn't going to be easy. Her father might try to change her mind, and Grace herself might refuse, but Emily's heart was stubborn once it settled on something. It didn't let go. The next morning, the smell of fresh bread woke her. She went downstairs and found her father already at the breakfast table, reading the newspaper. He didn't look angry, but he didn't look cheerful either. "Emily," he said, folding the paper and setting it down, "we need to talk about yesterday." She sat across from him, bracing herself. He poured coffee into his cup before speaking again. "I understand that you value Grace's kindness, but marriage? Marriage is not something that can be decided on emotions alone. There are responsibilities, appearances, expectations. Expectations for who?" Emily interrupted. "For you, or for the people who want to judge you?" Her father's brow furrowed. "For both," he said simply. "The world we live in is not forgiving. People will talk. They will not understand why a man like me would marry a woman from the staff." Emily leaned forward. "Do you care more about what strangers think, or about being with someone who actually loves you?" Her father didn't answer right away. He took a slow sip of his coffee. His eyes softened for a moment, and Emily wondered if he was remembering her mother. Then he sighed. "Emily, I just don't know if Grace would even want this." "She won't, unless you ask her," Emily replied. "She thinks she doesn't belong, but she does." After breakfast, her father went to his study again, and Emily decided to take a walk. Outside, the air was crisp, and the sound of birds filled the garden. She found Grace near the laundry room, hanging sheets to dry. The white fabric swayed gently in the wind. Emily stood beside her, holding the basket. "Grace, can I tell you something?" she asked. Grace nodded, and Emily continued. "My father thinks you wouldn't want to marry him. He thinks you'd feel out of place." Grace laughed softly. Not in a cruel way, but with a touch of sadness. "Emily, your father and I live in two different worlds. It's not just about Mitts, about how people will look at him if he chooses me." Emily shook her head. "Then they'll have to get used to it, because if he chooses someone fake just to make people happy, he'll regret it for the rest of his life." Grace didn't respond, but her hand slowed as she pinned the last sheet. Emily could see she was thinking about it. Later that day, Emily's father asked Grace to bring tea to the library. Emily stayed nearby, listening from the hallway. She heard her father thank Grace for her years of loyalty. And then he asked her what she thought of Emily's choice. Grace's voice was calm. "Sir, I'm honored, but I don't think I could ever be the kind of wife people expect for you." Her father was silent for a moment, then said, "And what kind of wife do you think I expect?" Grace hesitated. "Someone polished, someone from your circle, someone who knows how to handle the pressure of your world." "And what if I'm tired of that world?" her father asked quietly. The room went silent after that. Emily smiled to herself. She didn't know where this conversation would lead, but she could tell something inside her father had shifted. He wasn't dismissing the idea anymore. He was thinking about it, really thinking. That evening, when they sat down for dinner, the air felt different. Her father didn't mention the 5 women at all. He didn't mention marriage either. But Emily noticed the way his eyes lingered on Grace when she poured his tea. And for the first time, he smiled, not the polite smile he gave to guests, but a real one. Emily felt hope spark in her chest. This wasn't over. The decision might have shocked everyone, but maybe, just maybe, it had also opened a door. A door her father didn't know he wanted to walk through until now. A week passed since Emily had made her choice, and the mansion no longer felt the same. The fancy cars no longer pulled up to the front gate. There were no more loud voices of wealthy women trying to impress, and the rooms felt quieter, calmer. But under that calm was a feeling of uncertainty. Emily could tell her father was still thinking about what she had said. He didn't bring up the other women again, but he also didn't say anything about Grace. It was as if he was trying to figure out how to handle something completely outside his usual world. One evening, Emily found him sitting alone in the study. The firelight cast warm shadows on his face, and he looked deep in thought. She knocked softly on the doorframe. "Can I come in?" He nodded, setting his book aside. "Of course," he said. She walked in and sat across from him, waiting for him to speak. Finally, he sighed. "Emily, I've been thinking about what you said about Grace." Emily's heart jumped, and her father looked at her with a serious expression. "I can't deny that she's been loyal, kind, and good for this family." He paused. "But marriage is a big step. I can't rush into it." Emily leaned forward. "I'm not asking you to rush. I'm asking you to be honest about what makes you happy." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he poured himself a glass of water, took a sip, and then said, "If I'm honest, I do feel something when I see her. Something different from what I've felt with anyone else in a long time." Emily smiled. "Then maybe that's worth exploring," she said softly. The next day, something unexpected happened. Grace came into the living room carrying a tray of tea for Emily and her father. Her father looked at her for a moment longer than usual, and then said, "Grace, would you sit with us for a while?" Grace blinked in surprise. "Sir, I still have. Please," he interrupted gently. Emily hid a smile as Grace carefully set the tray down and sat at the far end of the couch. Her hands rested in her lap, and she looked unsure of why she Was there her father started asking her about her life, not her work, but her life. He asked where she grew up, what her favorite childhood memory was, what dreams she had before she started working. At first, Grace answered carefully, her voice soft, but as the minutes passed, she began to relax. Her stories were simple, but full of heart, playing under the mango trees as a child, singing in her church choir, helping her grandmother in the kitchen. Emily watched her father as he listened, really listened. She could see something changing in his eyes. He wasn't looking at Grace as just an employee anymore. He was seeing her as a person with a life, with experiences, with a heart. After Grace left the room, her father stayed quiet for a while. Finally, he said, "She's remarkable." Emily grinned. "I told you that night." Emily overheard something that made her even more hopeful. She had gone to the kitchen for a glass of water when she heard her father's voice in the hallway. He was talking to Grace. His tone was gentle, almost shy. "Grace, I know Emily's choice surprised you. It surprised me too, but I've realized she sees something I hadn't allowed myself to see." Grace's voice was low. "Sir, I've worked here for so many years, and I've always respected you. But I never thought you don't have to answer anything now," he said softly. "I just wanted you to know. I would like to get to know you, not as my employee, but as a person." There was a pause, and then Grace replied quietly, "I don't know if I belong in your world, but I would like that too." Emily tiptoed back to her room, her heart racing. She couldn't stop smiling. It was happening, slowly, but it was happening over the next few days. Her father and Grace spoke more often, sometimes in the garden, sometimes in the kitchen. Sometimes they laughed over small things, and other times they spoke seriously. Emily didn't push them, she just gave them space. One afternoon, she found them in the garden. Grace was showing her father how to plant herbs. He had dirt on his hands, something Emily had never seen before. He looked almost happy when he noticed Emily watching. He smiled in a way she hadn't seen since before her mother died. That night at dinner, there was a different energy at the table. Grace still served the food, but she sat with them afterward. They talked about small things, movies, favorite meals, memories from years ago. For once, the dining room didn't feel like a place for formal conversation. It felt like home. Emily knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. People would talk, relatives might disapprove, and her father's wealthy friends might not understand, but none of that mattered to her. She could see it now. Grace wasn't just part of their family because Emily wanted it. Grace was becoming part of their family because her father was starting to want it too. And as Emily went to bed that night, she realized something. The choice she had made wasn't just about picking a new mother. It was about giving her father a chance at real happiness, and giving Grace a place where she would be loved, respected, and never treated as just the maid again. Months passed, and the mansion slowly changed in ways Emily could feel every day. The halls didn't echo with the cold emptiness they once had. Instead, there was warmth, real warmth. It's a kind that comes from laughter in the kitchen, from shared meals, from the sound of voices that actually care about one another. Her father and Grace had grown closer. At first, it was small things, short conversations in the garden, sharing tea in the evenings, but over time, those moments became longer and more personal. Emily could see it in her father's face. He didn't carry the same heavy loneliness he used to. He was softer now, and there was a light in his eyes that had been gone for years. One Sunday morning, Emily came downstairs and found her father in the kitchen, an apron tied around his waist, flipping pancakes while Grace laughed beside him. It was such a strange sight. Her father, the man who once believed everything had to be done by staff, now cooking with his own hands. He looked up at Emily and smiled. "You're just in time. Breakfast is almost ready." Grace handed her a plate, and they all sat down together, eating and talking as if it had always been this way. The more time passed, the more natural it became. Grace wasn't just the maid anymore. She was part of their days, part of their laughter, part of the life inside those walls. She still helped with the house. But there was no longer that invisible line between family and staff. One evening, Emily's father asked her to come to his study. She sat across from him, curious. He looked serious, but not in a bad way. "Emily," he began, "I've made my decision." She held her breath. "I want to marry Grace." For a moment, Emily could only stare at him. Her heart swelled so fast she almost laughed and cried at the same time. "You mean it?" He nodded. "I mean it. I've thought about everything, what people might say, what our world might think. None of it matters. What matters is that she makes me happy. She makes this house feel alive again, and I believe your mother would have liked her." Emily smiled through tears. She would have loved her. The proposal wasn't grand or flashy. It happened in the garden under the soft evening light. Grace was tending to the flowers when her father walked up, holding a small velvet box. She froze when she saw it. "Sir?" "What?" "Not sir," he interrupted gently. "Just me, a man who wants to spend the rest of his life with you." Grace's hands trembled. "I don't know if I can be. You already are everything I need," he said softly, opening the box to reveal a simple but beautiful ring. "Will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes, and for a long moment she couldn't speak. Then she nodded, her voice breaking. "Yes. Yes, I will." The wedding was small. Nothing like the grand events the wealthy world expected from a millionaire. It was held in the garden, surrounded by flowers Grace had planted herself. Only close friends, a few relatives, and some of the staff who had been with the family for years were there. Emily wore a pale pink dress and stood beside Grace as she walked down the short path to meet her father. When the vows were spoken, Emily noticed something in her father's voice piece. He wasn't just making a promise, he was finding a home in the words. After the ceremony, they shared a simple dinner outdoors. The air was filled with laughter. The stars shone above. And for the first time in years, the mansion felt whole. Life after the wedding was different in the best ways. Grace became a true stepmother to Emily. Not by trying to replace her mother, but by being there when it mattered. She listened when Emily needed to talk. She celebrated her small victories. And she was firm when Emily needed guidance. There was no pretending. Everything between them was real. Her father was happier too. He still worked, still handled his business affairs, but he made more time for family. Sometimes Emily would find him and Grace sitting in the garden at night, sipping tea and talking quietly. Their laughter would carry into the house, soft and comforting. The people in their social circle were shocked at first. Some whispered, some even avoided them. But over time, many changed their minds when they saw how strong and genuine the relationship was. Those who didn't understand simply faded away, and her father didn't care. One evening, months later, Emily sat in the same living room where her father had first told her about choosing his new wife. She remembered how cold and pressured that day had felt, and she compared it to now the same room, but filled with warmth. Grace sitting beside her father, her hand in his. Her father looked over at Emily and smiled. "You know, you made the right choice that day." Emily laughed softly. "I know." Grace reached over and took Emily's hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "And you gave me something I never thought I'd have, a real family." Emily felt her chest tighten with emotion. She looked at them both and realized something. This wasn't just about choosing a new mother for herself. It had been about giving her father a chance at real happiness and giving Grace the place she truly deserved. That night, as Emily lay in bed, she thought about everything that had happened, from the day her father had introduced those 5 wealthy women, to the moment she had stood in front of them all and made her choice. She had taken a risk, but it had changed everything. The mansion was no longer just a big house filled with expensive things. It was a home again, filled with warmth, laughter, and love, and Emily knew, deep down, that her mother would be smiling too. Because in the end, she had chosen from the heart, and the heart had been right all along.